Michele de Rosa, one of our Erasmus Mundus students in the Environmental Studies program here at Aalborg University. Michele has been studying here and in Hamburg. And this is actually part of Michele's studies from his third semester. And you're working now on life cycle assessment and on the side, following further on the C40 Cities Climate Network here. So it's part of his first semester studies, and then what we're doing together with you as a research intern. Here.
Yeah, thank you for your introduction. As you said, I'm a GEM student, and I'm about to graduate, hopefully in 2 months. And my first semester project was about integration of climate change strategies and sustainable urban development in the context of the C40 Climate Leadership Group. And I will tell you shortly what it is about. And it was in cooperation, started in September as my third semester project. And then it continued also in the fourth semester as my side activity together with Patrick Driscoll from AU Copenhagen. Probably you will meet him this afternoon during the gaming, right? Yes. And together with Martin Levin. So it is actually an ongoing research process. And what I will present here is the direction that we are going and the partial findings that I present at the end of my third semester. So, what was our starting point? Our starting point, as you probably already know, is that cities are both the major source of greenhouse gas emissions. More than 70% of the world greenhouse gas emission comes from a urban context. But at the same time, cities are also the most threatened by climate change. Droughts, severe flooding, heat waves, economic damages. So, because of this, they should be, if they are not, at the forefront in combating climate change. But how does this happen? What should they do? Well, they should mitigate, so adapt mitigation strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so to mitigate the future impact of climate change. But at the same time, they also have to cope with the climate change effects that we already have now. So to adapt to the effect of climate change. These are the direct strategies, but there is an indirect strategies that may be really useful for them to speed up the process of implementing strategies in the urban planning, climate change strategies in urban planning. And this networking and sharing best practices and sharing experiences and also sharing the peculiarities of the urban area, because not all the strategies are good for each city, for every city. There are some specific peculiarities of some cities that makes possible to apply and more suitable some strategies instead of others. So we focus on this group, this network, the C40 network, because it's a relatively small group in terms of cities. When I started in September, there were 58 cities in this group. Now there are 63. And so it's quite easy to focus the attention on a limited number of cities, 58. But at the same time, they have like 20 million, more than 20 million people, inhabitants. And it's also a transnational municipal network. So it's a huge amount of people living in these cities and in very different contexts in the world. One of the starting points, one of the things that we noticed at the beginning of our research is that, in general, the adaptation plan is much less developed than mitigation plan. Why is it so? Well, probably this, what we thought before starting the research, it was that probably it's because adaptation is something that came up on the agenda in the last 10, 13 years, while mitigation is something that started to be on the agenda of the municipalities at the beginning of the 90s. So let's say adaptation is a bit late. And this chart that you see here from the Carmen et al. Shows that if you sum up all these, which means people, cities that don't have implemented yet an adaptation plan, it's like 80%, 82%. So at the only 18% already implemented an adaptation plan. What was our goal? Well, the goal was to build up a peer-validated extractable database. So what we want to do is to create a possibly huge database that contains several data about cities, and I will present some of the categories of data that we collected in this database. And this database is open. It's open to all the municipalities that want to share their data, to contribute to the data. And what is the purpose of this database? Is to support the urban planners in the municipalities to find out what are the best strategies for their municipality. This is, in theory, a simple concept, but it's extremely difficult for urban planners to find out who is doing what in which municipality, from what they can learn. So what we want to do is provide them with a tool that helps them to find where they should look and according to what they need. And last but not least, a learning purpose, which is to understand what are the main barrier to for many cities to adapt and mitigate to climate change, or what are also the main reason for success when there is a success. So what are the main barriers and what obstacles, what are the obstacles and the opportunities in the municipalities for implementing plans? And so let's say that the question that we were trying to answer was to what extent these three aspects are integrated, because it's true that it's not possible to have synergies between mitigation and adaptation, but to what extent we can have a synergy between adaptation and mitigation, and to what extent this can be also in synergy with the sustainable development. Shortly, some information about the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group. As I said, there are 58 cities that are spread all over the world. And there are three main categories of city. The steering committee city, which are basically cities that lead the network together with the mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg. And then there are participating cities, which are cities that are fully committed in the network, and then there are affiliated cities, which are cities that are only partially committed in exchanging information with the network. So what kind of information, what kind of data we are trying to collect in the database? We are trying to, of course, we started with an extensive literature review, and so what has already been done, what is already known out there, and then statistical databases. So, for instance, the World Bank, the UN, the CIA, and reports from municipalities, reports from, for instance, the Carbon Disclosure Project, the IPCC, and so on, and surveys that are already being led, and also direct contact with the people, officials working in the municipalities with climate change. So we try to have a semi-structured interview with them, but it's not always easy to get in contact with the people working with climate change in the city, if there is somebody working with climate change in the city. So this is also the first thing to find out, if there is somebody working, if there is a working group addressing the climate change issue in the municipality or not. And if there is, try to get information from them. And so the main data point that we collected can be reassumed as demographic data, socioeconomic data, political data, spatial data, biome, and most importantly, hazard and vulnerability assessment, where they've been led, and mitigation and adaptation documentation, mitigation and adaptation strategies. As and outcome of the rest. Based on this extensive literature review, we selected 6 main criteria to evaluate the level of integration between the strategies. And they are introduced here. And for instance, the first one is the percentage of urban population under the major jurisdiction. Why this is important? It is important because one of the barriers sometimes is administrative barrier, which means that sometimes the urban area on which the major has jurisdiction is not the total area, the total flood plan of the municipality. For instance, in Mexico City, I don't know if there is some Mexican between you, and if there is, probably they know better than me, that in Mexico City, part of the city is located in a former lake. So what happened is that if this is the lake where the city is, the former lake where the city is located, all around we have hills. And part of Mexico City, the major jurisdiction of Mexico City, it doesn't cover also the hills. So let's say it covers only some of them. So whatever happened here is not controlled by the mayor of Mexico City. So if there is a flood, and if there are unauthorized constructions on this hill, so the runoff coefficient of water will increase because there is more cement, and therefore the soil is less permeable. The runoff water will flood Mexico City, but the mayor of Mexico City can do very little about this because this belongs to another municipality. And this is also the case of the small town where I come from, for instance, in south of Italy. Then the second criteria is the presence of a dedicated environmental office or the coordination between municipal departments. This is because we see that climate change planning it's really a cross-disciplinary issue. So you cannot address it if not by making different departments working together. So transportation, energy departments, planning departments, and so on. Urban planning department, and so on. So if there is a dedicated office, it's much more, the work of addressing climate change is more facilitated. Then if there is an up-to-date greenhouse gas emission inventory at municipal level, and if there is a climate change municipal mitigation strategies. The fifth criteria is if the municipality developed a vulnerability assessment or an hazard assessment. And the sixth criteria if there is an adaptation strategy already in place in a municipality. So what are the results? The results are that, okay, just briefly explain these charts because they will present all the results. In gray we have the cities per continent belonging to the network, and in black the cities that implemented, in this case, that have an environmental office. So we can see that almost always when a city has an environmental office, also has led a greenhouse gas emission inventory. So if there is somebody who takes care of this, it's more likely to happen. And but even when there is a greenhouse gas emission inventory, it's not always consistently applied. What does it mean? It means that even when there is a greenhouse gas emission, the inventory is not always made with the same methodology. So the results sometimes are not comparable. Or it's not constantly updated. So if we have a greenhouse gas emission inventory of 2 years ago, but then we don't do another this year, we cannot compare the results, and we can never know if we actually reduce or not the greenhouse gas emissions. So even when they have one, it doesn't mean that it's effective, because it's not updated, or maybe it's made with a different criteria than other municipalities. Cities where a mitigation plan was found. They are mainly located, again, in Europe and North America. while cities with an adaptation plan, they are more equally distributed. And this is very interesting because we said at the beginning, I said at the beginning that adaptation plan is something that has been developed in the last 10, 13 years. So we expect that also in this case there is the cities like in developing countries are like delayed, but we see that actually it's not that much the difference between developed countries and developing countries. And why is it so? Well, an answer could be that adaptation in developing countries, let's say Ho Chi Minh City. Ho Chi Minh City has millions of people living really at the sea level. So if there is a flood or sea level rising in the Ho Chi Minh cities, the impact is devastating. So that's why it's extremely much more perceived the risk of climate change than in New York City, for instance, from the population, I mean. So there is like, probably more than in New York City feel the need of doing something because the risk is concrete, it's right there, now. And so there is like the call for action. But even though there is a strong interest towards adaptation, we see that the problem is that this is not actually taking place, or if it's taking place in a very confused way. And because very little cities have led in vulnerability assessment and hazard assessment. So it's very difficult sometimes to understand how can they have a mitigation strategy, how can they have an adaptation strategy if they don't have led an hazard and vulnerability assessment. How can they know what are the hotspots to address if they don't have a local hazard assessment and a local vulnerability assessment? And why they don't have done so? Well, because what most often we hear is that they don't have the sufficient administrative capacity. And that means they don't have enough expertise, they don't have enough money, or they don't have enough attention from the politicians. For instance, what I have here is in Athens, there is a small group of 4 people working with climate change issues, but 3 of them are very young people, just they came out from the university, and 1 is the leader of the group. And they're actually 3 architects. And so with a limited also experience in urban planning and climate change. And what can they do with this? Of course, with this number of people and expertise is limited. Plus, they don't have enough money to implement the strategies, even if they come up with a solution. What I hear from Rome is that there is a very strong demand from request from the politician to put in the agenda the issue related to climate change. But then, when they budget the money, there are no money for that. So the official responsible for this in Rome was mad at them because they said they want me to do this, but I don't have enough resource for them. They don't give me enough personnel, they don't give me enough money. So even if there is sometimes the interior political attention, this doesn't mean that it follows with a concrete resource to implement it. And another important finding is that in general, so both in Europe, North America, and of course also in South America and East Asia, and in Africa, there is very little documentation available concerning the local initiative and studies and approaches. And this is very surprising, especially in the case of cities belonging to a network, because we assume that to share information, this information should be available. But if they are not available, well, it seems a bit difficult that they can be shared. And last consideration is about the nature of the approach and the projects that are taking place in these municipalities. In most cases, we see that they are project-based, there is a project-based approach. And especially in the developing countries, especially where there is a lack of fundings, then a project-based approach is most used. And this table is very interesting because it shows the emission of top 10 cities in three very different way of evaluating them. So according to also the way we account for the emission, we can have a totally different chart. So that also shows how sometimes data about achievement or contribution to the solution or to the problem, it's very, very a political issue. We can say that New York is doing very bad because there's a lot of greenhouse gas emission, but we can also say that New York is doing great because if we count the greenhouse gas emission per GDP, then New York doesn't appear. So, in conclusion, well, as I said, this is an ongoing process. This research is an ongoing process, and what we are trying to do now is to focus our attention of background documentation for Europe and North America, only because it's supposed to be, but it's not. It's supposed to be easier to find any kind of documentation like that could lead to a mitigation on adaptation strategies. So not only vulnerability assessment, hazard assessment, but sustainability plan and flood risk in the area, or any. Then they also assume different names in different cities. So whatever information they have as a background information, we are trying to collect them. And of course, to complete also the contact list and building a code book in order to make this database to run this database with a simple software on the model of the European Social Survey. And the idea is that this data, as it happened for the European Social Survey, they should be updated constantly, every let's say 1 or 2 years. And with the biennial cross-section survey, that should, among all the cities for which we have collected the information, the contact information, so that this database should be like a dynamic database, should be constantly updated, and the information should be available for all the urban planners of the city belonging to the network. Thank you for your attention, and you can questions.
Questions for Michele?
It's lunchtime.
Yeah, it's one question. Who else is studying this? Are you the only one studying this? In terms of C40?
No, you mean in Open University?
No, in the world. I mean, C40 is global. Is anyone else doing what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I know. We have a paper. I don't remember the name of the authors, but I have on my computer. They mapped already, like the question has been asked before, who is looking at who. And the result is that the cities that are source of information are the cities that started the network, so London and New York, and of course are most advanced also in the process, and also have more probably resources, economic resources. And then in Europe, Copenhagen, Amsterdam, and Rotterdam. And I would say that from what I saw, these 5 cities are absolutely the most advanced and the one that provided the most complete documentation. And they are the source of information. And while let's say that there are the boundaries, sometimes is the language. The barriers sometimes are the language. So English-speaking countries look at London and New York, and in
New York doesn't go anywhere.
no, no. But yeah, for instance, European cities look at each other. So there are some regional and cultural barriers, probably. So from their research, that's what they underline.
I mean, the Carbon Disclosure Project, which started out as a project for organizations to disclose their emissions inventory, is also looking at cities now, and of course also include these. It's a bit larger database, and they actually opened it now, which is very interesting to us because then we can dig into the data. So with consultancies from there, Acorn based out of the US, we were working with them to really build this database. So one of the points that Michele made was that it's really difficult, first of all, to get in touch with people, then speak with them, different languages, cultures, whatnot. So what we're trying also to do is, perhaps through Klimalab, perhaps through other types of networks, really build local, perhaps through student projects, that we have individuals actually sitting in these either C40 cities or the CDP cities, and actually trying to work together. So build a network of students and professors to actually build this type of database that is, as Michele said, open source, and will then be able to draw out new data all the time and benefit further studies to really understand, well, who are cities looking at, and asking the questions of, well, why did you talk with that person over there, and what did you get from it, and what was then implemented, and so on and so forth. So really understand the processes behind the building of the strategies, the development of the plans, what actually came out here, what was the actual, did you avoid any floods, or what actually came out of this. And if you're looking at a room like this, I mean, there are at least 4, 5, 6 cities within this network that could actually say, well, hey, are there 5 of you here who want to be part of this? Then let us know. Because it's just a matter of giving you access to the right tools and then building up a common platform for something like this. And then Michele wouldn't need to call Riga, as an example, right? Or, I don't know,
Moscow.
Athens, Moscow.
And of course,
Somebody else would be able to do that, and we could then gain commonly on this. That's the idea. Rushing forward. Thank you. Thanks very much.
thank you.